West Settlements, and I started the business 3 years ago, and I work from home. Why choose me over any other settlement agent? Well, I have been in the industry for over 20 years. I didn't do a 6-month course and then just start my own business. I have a lot of experience, and I know a lot about, I keep up to date with all the changes in the legislation and so on, so I do a lot of courses to keep up with that. This is what I do. I act for a seller in the sale of property, act for a buyer. I can change details on the title with regard to survivorship, transmission, family court orders, and I can do subdivision applications. I'll briefly go through everything that I do. The real estate agent would do a contract for sale between a buyer and a seller, and then that comes to me. The appointment to act is obviously when the buyer or the seller has chosen the settlement agent, and I do the appointment to act. The verification of identity is what we have to do nowadays to identify a seller, but it's also anybody that's changing details on the title, we also have to do a verification of identity. So that is the 100 points ID where I need to see their original passport, driver's licence, other forms of identification. I do that myself. People can go to Australia Post and do it, but I tend to like to do it myself so I know that the person who's dealing with the property is that person. Discharge of mortgages, I've got access to all banks' discharge authorities, so I usually send that to the client also. If it's a clear title, I pick that up from my client as well. So when I do my verification of identity, I'll get the original title as well. What we've got next, working order warranty, that's conditions on the contract to make sure that all their plumbing, electrical, everything's working, so the seller needs to sort that out. Make sure the conditions on the contract are satisfied, leave the property in a clean condition and vacate the property 12 noon after settlement. Now for the buyer, it's the same thing, contract of sale, appoint a settlement agent, so I do the appointment to act. First home buyers, I try and help them. It's pretty daunting for a first home buyer, especially for a young person, so I try and help them with the process. Obviously they don't have to pay stamp duty if the property is vacant land. It's $300,000 is the threshold, and for residential residences it's $430,000. They get $10,000 for buying vacant land. My drawer is full of vacant land waiting for issue of titles, because I think a lot of first home buyers out there are buying the land and building because they're getting the $10,000, because established residences only get the $3,000. Title insurance, I provide all information regarding title insurance, and we're going to learn more about that shortly. Make sure they sign their bank documents, finance approval, make sure that's in the time specified on the contract, and make sure they sign all their bank documents in time for settlement. Special conditions, the buyer would normally have a termite inspection and a building inspection on the contract, so they would need to make sure that they get those done before in the time frame of the contract. And then they do their final inspection usually a week before settlement, so the property's in the same condition as when they sign the contract and that everything's working. This is changing details on the title. A survivorship application is when one of the proprietors died, and if they're joint tenants on the title, then I can do a survivorship application, get a copy of the death certificate and put it in the sole survivor's name. Transmission application is when they're tenants in common on a property, so it has to be who the will says the property goes to and who the executor of the will is, and then they have to apply for probate. adding a spouse, that's if, you know, you get married or you're in a de facto relationship for 2 years and you want to put that person on the property, then I can do that. That's it's exempt from stamp duty, so there's no stamp duty. And deleting a spouse by family court order, that happens quite a lot when people separate, and that's stamp duty is only $20, so they don't have to pay exorbitant stamp duty. And subdivisions, when subdivisions are done, I can do the application for new titles, so so they can get the land split however they want. And obviously, like I said, I have to do the VOIs, like verification of identity, on all these people that are doing changes on their title. Because I've provided the mobile service, I can go to them. I'm a member of the Australian Institute of Conveyancers in Western Australia. That's what AICWA stands for. And I'm a CPC, which is Certified Practicing Conveyancer. CPC means I have to get 100 points every year. So I have to do various courses that they run to get that 100 points. So I keep up to date with everything in the settlement industry. I offer a mobile service in the Perth area, and next year they're introducing electronic conveyancing. Well, that should come in next year. So that means outside clerks will be obsolete. They don't need to go in the city anymore. We'll be able to do all the conveyancing online, so hopefully it'll streamline things and make it a lot easier. Won't have to go and get bank checks and things like that. It'll all happen online. My ideal referral is basically anybody buying, selling, or needing details changed on their title. So next, I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about title insurance. Well, I'm not. My special guest is. His name's Joe Claudio. We go back a long way. I started out as an outside clerk for him many, many years ago. Joe's been working in various law firms and had his own law business. And I'll hand it over to Joe.
Thank you, Theresa. We do go back a long time, and I said before when I had hair. But and with respect to a legal practitioner, I decided to jump ship 3 years ago, so I don't have to do these CPDs anymore. But I was a legal practitioner involved when First Title came to Australia. First Title of the parent company in the United States is called First American. Commenced operations in 1889. They don't have a torrent system in the United States. It's a bit like our old chain of title in Australia. There are some properties in West Australia, if I remember correctly, Wellington locations 163, 210, a chain of title properties. So if you buy property in the United States without title insurance, you'd be mad, because you can't get a guarantee of title. In Australia, the Torrens title does its best to give you a guarantee of title, but there are some issues, and highlighted recently 2 years ago by the very first fraud in West Australia, where Mr. Milden Hall's house was stolen by the Nigerians. You'd all heard about that. There is a sting in that tale because, as people would know, Section 68 of the Transfer of Land Act talks about indefeasibility. When you become the registered proprietor of land, the state guarantees your title to that piece of land. So Mr. Milden Hall came back from his holidays, found a family in his house. The family in his house bought the property without notice of any issues or fraud and paid consideration for that property. So under our legislation, the owner of the property had indefeasible title. Mr. Milden Hall lost his property. Now, I know the lawyers involved that claimed the compensation from the state, and it took them a long, long time because they had to prove a negative, that they didn't know the Nigerians. And that's what Landgate wanted at first. Had he been title insured, probably the payout would have occurred between 3 or 4 months at the most. So what is title insurance? Title insurance covers a number of things. You've got a flyer in front of you which sets out the sorts of things that it covers. It's not comprehensive, it's just an indication. But title insurance complements the conveyancing industry. And that's why Theresa, discharging her duty of care to her clients, which she knows all about, placed upon her by her industry's code of conduct, says that she must tell people about title insurance because Theresa is not a surveyor, is not a builder, is not an architect, doesn't know, and I can say this because with my Italian background, Luigi does an extension at the back of the house that no one knows about, doesn't get authorisation for it. So illegal and unauthorised structures are covered by this policy, as well as boundary issues and some complicated issues in relation to things like there's a property in, what's that one next to Wanneroo? I'll think of it in a second. There's a restricted covenant on the title says that the property must be built out of brick. Now the benefit of that is for everyone else in the subdivision. The burden is on the person that owns that property not to build anything except that brick. So 2 or 3 owners later, that fellow decides to do an extension above, goes to local authority, gets a licence to build an extension above, but it's out of wood. I can go on forever, I'll just restrict this. So the new buyer picked up when he looked at the builder's report and the title that there was a restrictive covenant and there was a breach of it because the upstairs had been built out of wood. What that meant was that someone in the subdivision could at some point in time knock on the door and say, remove it. If you don't, I'm going to go and get an order for you to remove it because you're in breach of the restrictive covenant. In that case, we organised a title insurance policy for a known risk. So the insurer took that risk and covered that property. And the settlement proceeded. And there's lots of examples with spas and fences and pools that are unauthorised, which the policy covers as well. So how much does it cost? Again, there's a schedule on that flyer that you've got, but effectively it's $50 for a $500,000 house. I said the other day to somebody, you pay $1,000 a year for a $10,000 car, which reduces the value, but you don't pay $350 for a $500,000 house. So, talk to Theresa more about this.
Yeah, has anybody got any questions or about me or title insurance? Yes, Jen?
You talk about the different levels of stamp duty. Is there a standard charge
There
for
is,
all the
yeah,
changes
there is.
of title?
There is a scale with stamp duty. It just depends on the value of the property. Like we first came by, there's a threshold. But if they go over that threshold, it just increments slightly to
Oh yeah,
full
no, sorry,
stamp
I
duty.
don't mean sort of that. I mean, you're saying that some changes to title, the stamp duty, some is none.
Oh,
some is very
okay, yeah,
little.
like with survivorship, change of name and things, yeah. There's own stamp duties with survivorship transmission, there's no stamp duty, they're applications, but with transfer of I'm trying to think of, like family court order, it's only $20 stamp duty if there's a family court order, and like I said, if you're adding a spouse, it's exempt, there's no stamp duty at all. Any more questions? Yes, John?
When a person is buying a property, an existing property, and there's an addition at the back where there's a large shed, is it the buyer's responsibility to check that those are authorised structures, or is it the settlement agent's responsibility?
Well, that usually starts at the contract stage, doesn't it, Brad? When you're signing a contract, there's usually a clause in the contract to say that the structures are approved. So,
well, yeah, to a certain degree, it's called as built. So if the agent should think that any of the improvements are owner built or not quite right, then they should take further investigation.
Yeah.
If everything looks okay, you're allowed to assume that they are okay.
Because if I'm acting for the buyer and we do more of the rates and inquiries, there's the orders and requisitions that we order from the council. The council usually provide a list of all, and if there's building being done on the property, there'll be building approvals and so on that. And if it's not on there, that's probably when the buyer should say, well, hang on, let's take this further and investigate it.
Or get some title insurance and make it their problem.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
Last question, guys.
Theresa, I send that client to you because when they do mediation and they do make consent orders, they get the $20 stamp duty.
Yeah.
But then, but she then wanted to add her new spouse to the So first it has to be, one has to come off,
Yeah.
and then a new one has to come on.
Yeah.
So is that then also only, like the new one doesn't cost anything then? Is that correct?
That's right. Stamp
Okay.
duty's nothing. Yeah.
All right,
That's
good,
right.
thanks.
Okay. Thanks.
Thank you very much,
everybody.
Teresa.
Well
Great
done,
presentation.